Hello there, Internet. Mogwai here, and I got another video for you guys today. Today we're going to be talking about the most powerful and or interesting cards in the upcoming expansion of Ravnica Allegiance. In order to make it to this prestigious listing of mine, the card must meet one of the following two requirements. A, it must be very powerful and thus potentially metagame defining in standard, or B, it must have a very interesting effect which can enable you to build some cool decks around it. Pretty simple, right? So without further ado, I'm going to talk about the following 18 cards that have made it to this list. And you guys can tell me in the comment section down below if I missed any that you would want me to talk about. But these are the ones that really caught my attention. And, the ones that warrant a little bit of cool story bop time on them, right? So without further ado, let's hop into it. So the first card we're going to talk about today is quite the powerhouse, and that is the Angel of Grace, a 5-mana angel creature with 5 power, 4 toughness, the flash and flying keywords, and an ability that says the following. When Angel of Grace enters the battlefield until the end of the turn, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. And on top of that, she has an ability that can be procced if she is in the graveyard, which is enabled by exiling her and paying 6 mana. That transforms your life total to 10. So she could be a big healing play in a pinch. But the implications that come from this card primarily lie in her main ability. This card, I believe, will overtake Lyra Dawnbringer in standard. Obviously, she's amazing in draft and an auto pick in draft. But I do believe that Angel of Grace will be more prevalent in the standard metagame than Lyra Dawnbringer is. I think Lyra Dawnbringer is a very powerful 5-drop naturally, but she is quite susceptible to the heavy amount of removal available in the current standard metagame, while Angel of Grace, because of her flash keyword, that alone will give her quite the edge over Lyra, especially in the control matchup. One of the interesting things about Angel of Grace is that she is the only card in the game that will be able to counter a buffed up Banefire, because she does not prevent the damage. She modifies it. And according to the rules, unless I'm missing something here, I could be wrong, but I'm almost 100% certain that Angel of Grace will prevent Banefire from killing you. And that is huge, because she would be the only card in the game that can actually do that. And then that alone is a very big deal. I think Angel of Grace has big implications for standard and finds home and utility in pretty much all matchups. I think Flash is one of the most powerful keywords a creature can have. And I think this is going to be quite the bomb and will be potentially metagame defining for sure. I expect big things from Angel of Grace. If you're a fan of Boros Weenies and Selenia tokens, Swarmy tactics in general, then you are going to enjoy this next card. And that is the Unbreakable Formation, a 3-mana instant which gives your creatures indestructible until the end of the turn. But if you play this during your main phase, you proc the addendum. I don't know what that word means, but you proc it. And it enables you to give a +1/+1 counter to every single one of your creatures and give them vigilance until the end of the turn. So this card, if you play during your main phase, has a very similar effect to Chapter 3 of Song of Freya's enchantment, which is the card from the Dominaria set. Which basically gives a +1/+1 counter to each creature you control, indestructible, vigilance, and trample. So this card is all that minus the trample. Still, a potentially game-winning play. If you have developed a, wide enough board, this effect can be absolutely devastating. It gives you a non-consequential attack, unless they have Settle the Wreckage. What I mean by that is that you can basically attack without having any consequences, because your creatures are indestructible, so they won't die in trades, and they have vigilance, so you can preserve them as blockers in case you are facing an opposing, threatening board in regards to creatures. This is a potentially very powerful card. Really swingy and not that expensive to play either. I've seen people comment about this card focusing on the defensive capabilities of it, but this is an offensive card. This is a card meant to enable you to push insane damage with your Swarm. And if you compare this to a very metagame defining and tier 1 card in Heroic Reinforcements, which is one of the main reasons why Boros Weenies is so high up in, the metagame standings right now. This card is not that different. It is 1 mana cheaper. It doesn't give you 2 units and thus enables you to push 4 damage on its own, but it gives your units vigilance and indestructible. Like, vigilance on a swarm is very, very impactful, and indestructible also has very key implications too. Like, having a free attack goes a long way with Stormy Tactics, and I think Unbreakable Formation is going to be metagame defining for sure, and we'll see this card, especially in Selenia token decks, though I could definitely see this bad boy in Boros Weenies too. I think, like, I see it being very, very strong. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's hard to see this card not putting in the work in Standard, honestly. So let's move on to Blue. Now, Blue is in the same position as Red, in my opinion, in regards to the Ravnica Legions expansion. I think they have the least amount of both interesting and powerful cards. I think Blue and Red, especially Red, suffer from this. They have some, cool, interesting options for the limited format for draft, but I don't think they have the most, metagame defining cards coming in here, basically, especially considering the standard metagame and how packed it already is, right, in regards to Blue and Red. But there is a very interesting card that I wanted to talk about for Blue. A very, honestly, like, funny effect, but also really cool for control mirrors. And I think it warrants a mention, and that is Eyes Everywhere, a 3-mana enchantment that says the following: at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. So basically, a more expensive, worse version of Search for Azcanta initially, right? But here's where the fun part lies. If you pay 6 mana, you can exchange control of Eyes Everywhere with target non-land permanent. You can only activate this ability at the same time you would cast a sorcery. This last part of this effect may seem like a downside, but it actually is an upside to the effect, because if that weren't the case, your opponent would be able to react immediately to this effect. So you would pay 6 mana and trade this with something else, and your opponent would be able to pay 6 mana and make the exchange back, right? But because this can only be casted as if you were casting a sorcery, your opponent cannot react to this with their own Eyes Everywhere once they receive it. What's really funny about this is that, first of all, this enchantment seems very slow for aggro. Like, I feel like aggro will laugh at you if you play this. Like, they want you to play stuff like this. Search for Azcanta is already considered quite slow in the aggro matchups, against Mono Red or Boros Weenies. But this is even slower, and it's obviously less good because Search for Azcanta, even though it doesn't technically say on the card description, it surveils. What it does is surveilling. It sends cards to the graveyard. This is scries, which means that you send the cards to the bottom of your deck. And it's always better to fill up your graveyard with the cards than, scrying, right? So the effect and the timing of Search for Azcanta is superior to this, and obviously the fact that it can convert into Azcanta, right? But the potential this card has of stealing a Teferi in a control mirror is hilarious. Also, against mid-range matchups, you can steal their Planeswalker or their 5-drops or higher, and if they don't play blue themselves, they can't. You don't even have to worry about interacting with this. They could just keep it there, and they won't be able to activate it themselves because they lack blue mana, right? But in the case in which you're facing a control mirror and they do have blue mana, then you can combine this with the likes of Blink of an Eye, or if you steal Teferi, you use its -3 loyal ability to return this to the third position of the top of the owner's deck, which means it's your deck, so you return it to your own deck, and not your opponent's. And if you blink an eye on it, or any sort of effect that returns a permanent to the owner's hand, it will return to your hand, which means that, like, the idea of stealing a Teferi is just hilarious. Like, the fact that this can serve as a Search for Azcanta and then, like, trade with a game-winning Planeswalker is just quite nutty, and I will definitely be trying it just because of that, just for the memes in that sense. I think it could be a legitimate sideboard option if you're running a control deck and you want to have this against opposing control decks. I think it could definitely fulfill an important role there. I don't know if this card is a smart choice to run in the best of one ranked environment because, like I said, it's a bit too slow for aggressive decks. Maybe maybe even too slow for mid-range matchups as well, but maybe not. Maybe you can afford to make that play in that scenario, right? But the idea of trading this with something like, I don't know, combining the for example, like I'm thinking about specific scenarios, right? But having the tower land, taking away the hexproof from Karness Tyrant and trading this with, I mean, that's just super specific and unlikely, right? But it's really funny. Like, if you get it to, like, proc, it's really funny. And I think it's a very interesting effect. And I'll definitely be testing this out in some, Esper or Jeskai control builds, or maybe even Dimir. So, definitely will be trying this out. I'm not saying it's going to be metagame defining by any means, but it's a cool card. So we're going to move on to black, and we're going to tackle the Font of Agonies, a 1-mana enchantment that says the following: whenever you pay life, put that many blood counters on Font of Agonies. Then, for 2 mana, you can proc its ability, which you need to remove 4 blood counters from Font of Agonies, and then you destroy target creature. This is a really cool design. Like, this enchantment is one of the coolest designs out of the entire set, in my opinion, though I don't believe it's quite competitively viable. I will be trying out this card, but there's not that many cards out there in standard right now that synergize with this or enable this, right? Though it is like I said, a really, really interesting design, as it enables you to, for 2 mana, destroy any creature you want, and you can keep doing this. But obviously, you need 4 life to kill a creature, and that's easier said than done. And the deck that I would build this round is a deck that has an easy time gaining life. Because first of all, against aggro, this is kind of like suicide. Right? If you're paying 4 life against an aggro deck, that's a death sentence right there, right? But maybe, and the thing is, like, against mid-range decks, that can also be quite the price to pay. But as of right now, like, if we look at the card pool in standard, there's few cards that actually enable this, right? You have the Adanto Vanguard, which doesn't really mix with this, I believe, because it's more fit for aggressive decks. Then you got Argyll's Bloodfast. You got 2 enchantments here. You can play one turn 1 and the other one turn 2, and one can potentially enable the other. The problem is Argyll's Bloodfast requires 2 mana, not only paying 2 life, but also 2 mana to proc said effect, which means that it's still quite slow, and you're losing life in the process, which can be especially detrimental if you're facing a rather aggressive deck, right? On top of that, you have the Blood Operative, which is a little bit awkward because his effect requires you to pay 3 life, so you're not quite there to proc this, so I don't think that's a good example. And I think the 2 best enablers are Doom Whisperer and Underrealm Lich. Doom Whisperer potentially being the best one. It's the most flexible. Provides you with a 6/6 body that can enable you to block against more aggressive tactics, so you can pay the life and stabilize and not, get run over while you're, reducing your life total. But overall, this is like I said, very interesting, but gonna be hard to make work, I think. But I'm gonna definitely be looking into it and seeing ways that I can enable this. But it's going to be easier than done. It has to be a deck that enables you to, like I said, gain health quite efficiently, right? Which is easier said than done. But I'll be experimenting with Font of Agonies for sure. And then we got Cry of the Cranium, a 3-mana sorcery that says the following: all creatures get -2/-2 until the end of the turn. Exile all creature cards in all graveyards that would put there from the battlefield this turn. If a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So the reason why this card is in this list is not because it's particularly interesting. In fact, not because it would be even original. It is a better version of a card that we see play of in the current standard meta, and that is Golden Demise. Especially, I believe, in best of 1 ranked, as Golden Demise is known to be a good counter to Boros Weenies, Selenia tokens, and to a certain degree, mono red aggro and mono blue tempo, right? It's a very efficient board wipe because the -2/-2 effect bypasses indestructible. So it's one of the few ways you have to effectively board wipe and deal with the Adanto Vanguard as well. So the reason why Cry of the Cranium is a better version of Golden Demise in my eyes is because of all the exile effects that it comes with, right? Like the fact that the creatures that you kill with it and the creatures that die that turn are exiled instead, which means that the Hunted Witness does not proc because it wouldn't die, and it also means that the Midnight Reaper does not proc either because it would be exiled. And if you play 2 of these and you're able to wipe out a Rekindling Phoenix with 2 of these consecutively, then it also does not proc. Very niche scenarios, but the fact that they're a thing already makes it more useful than Golden Demise, which Golden Demise is like beneficial effect of not hitting your own stuff if you have City's Blessing, when generally you play it in a deck which doesn't play many creatures to begin with, is less of a detriment in comparison to what all these exile effects, provide you with, right? So very straightforward card that doesn't really provide anything new, but is a better version of something we already had. And we got Rakdos Burn's best new friend, at least in my opinion, and that is the Spawn of Mayhem, a originally 4-mana creature with 4 power and 4 toughness, with the Spectacle ability, which means that if you've dealt damage to the opposing opponent that turn, you can play this card for 3 mana. And the Flying Trample keywords are alongside an ability that says the following: at the beginning of your upkeep, Spawn of Mayhem deals 1 damage to each player. Then, if you have 10 or less health, you put a +1/+1 counter on Spawn of Mayhem. So, the reason why I say that this is Rakdos Burn's new best friend, at least a creature variant of that, is because the ability to play this for 3 mana is quite huge. It does require 2 black sources of mana, which is one of the things that could hold it back a little bit in that deck, since I believe Rakdos is, at least the burn deck will be more focused on red than black, so that could be a little bit of an issue, but with the introduction of the new shock lands and such, I think that can be mitigated, and playing a 4/4 with Flying and Trample for 3 mana is huge for an aggressive burn deck. Like, that represents more of a threat than a Goblin Chain Whirler does. And on top of that, it has an ongoing effect of dealing 1 damage at the beginning of your upkeep. So if this does not get answered, on top of like the damage that it's dealing itself, it's also, getting more and more damage onto the opponent every turn, which makes it even more menacing. I think it's good enough to fit in those decks. It's going to enable them to apply quite a bit of pressure, and like I said, if you can play this for 3 mana, it's gonna be tough for your opponent if they cannot answer this, because the 4/4 stats make it quite thick. Only the likes of Lava Coil can really answer this early on in the game or cast down, and it can apply massive pressure to the opponent because it also avoids Ritual of Suit. Despite the fact that you play it for 3 mana, because its original cost is 4 mana, it does not get board wiped by Ritual of Suit, which is very, very important, right? Strong dude, and I think definitely it will see play in aggressive decks for sure. And next we got one of my favorite cards from the Ravnica Allegiance set, a card that reeks potential. It's so funny. The Pestilence Spirit. Kill me. A 3-mana creature spirit with 3 power, 2 toughness, the Menace and Death Touch keywords, an ability that says the following: instant and sorcery spells you control have Death Touch. What Death Touch means, in case you're wondering or you're new into the game, is that any amount of damage that they deal to a creature is enough to destroy it. So, when I look at this card, I think about a rather aggressive variant of Rakdos with cards like Dual Shot and Radiating Lightning. So, I like the idea of it. I love it. I don't know. I don't know how good this would be, but you can bet your ass I'm going to try it. Like, I'm going to build as many decks as I need to build around Pestilence Spirit until I make it work. I want to play Pestilence Spirit on turn 3, and then follow that up on turn 4, play Radiating Lightning, deal 3 damage to my opponent's face, and board wipe all their creatures. And with one of like the most swaggiest plays available in Standard right now, I think. Like, that is just so cool. 1 mana Dual Shot. I killed 2 creatures for 1 mana as an instant. Like, come on now. Oh my god, is Dual Shot an instant? Let me actually check that real quick, because I can't say I played the card too often. Let me take a look at it. Dual Shot is indeed an instant. So holy shit, that's nutty. I don't know. It may be terrible. I don't care. I'm going to be building my decks around Pestilence Spirit, and I will make it work. Also, like, the body is nice. I mean, obviously he's vulnerable to shock with that 2 health. So his stats aren't really all that great, but they're not that terrible either, right? Considering he has Menace and Death Touch. With Menace, he forces at least 2 creatures to block him, which means that if he gets blocked, I exchange with 2 creatures. So it's already a very hard creature to block to begin with. I don't know. I think he's quite decent, honestly. And like I said, I want to build a rather aggressive Rakdos deck that can out-tempo control decks, but also board wipe in the mid-range and fellow aggro matchups, and I'm just very excited with that concept. I don't know. I'm definitely going to try it. So, again, one of my favorite cards, and really looking forward to trying this one out. The next one we got is the only card that I'm going to feature from Red. I mean, I may seem a little bit biased because red is perhaps my least favorite color, as I'm not a big fan of mono red or anything, but to be completely honest with you, I'm not really impressed nor too intrigued by many or any of the red cards in Ravnica Allegiance. I feel like, they have, the Skargan Hellkite right there, but that is, a 5-mana dragon that I feel gets outclassed by other ones. I don't think it's that good, personally. Maybe I'm wrong. The only card that really somewhat intrigued me is Gates Ablaze, which is a 3-mana sorcery that says the following: Gates Ablaze deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of gates you control. So, interesting card and potentially a solid board wipe option for either ramp or control decks that have, several gates in their lineup naturally. I don't know. It's hard to imagine this being more useful than a Deafening Clarion, to be fair, because in order to set it up to deal some good damage, you need to have a good amount of gates, and it's not like we have that many different gates available to us right now. I don't know. Maybe this card will see more and more play as more gates are introduced onto the game, but as of right now, I honestly think it's just the worst Deafening Clarion. I wanted to make a mention to at least one red card in this video, but like I said, it's definitely the most underwhelming color out of all these in this set, in my opinion. Maybe you guys can prove me wrong, and there's like a card that I'm missing here in regards to potential, but that's that's my current view of red. So let's go on and let's go ahead and move on to green. All right, and the next card we're going to talk about is Noxious, the MTG card, the Biogenic Ooze, a 5-mana ooze creature with 2 power and 2 toughness, an ability that says the following: when Biogenic Ooze enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 green ooze creature token. And then on top of that, at the beginning of your end step, you put a +1/+1 counter on each ooze you control. And also, for 4 mana, you can proc its ability of creating a 2/2 green ooze creature token. Noxious himself was very excited about this card, and in my opinion, rightfully so. This is a very, very cool creature. Mathematically speaking, just the card itself does kind of, carry its own weight for being a 5-mana cast, as you are getting a total of 12 stats out of it initially, because you do have your two bodies, but both of them are getting a +1/+1 counter towards the end step, right? So unless this gets disrupted, which it can, you get, like I said, 12 worth of stats or 5. In the standard metagame, this is still below average. Like, you want more out of your 5-drop initially, but the combo potential this card has is quite fascinating, really. There's 2 cards in this set that already synergize well with the Biogenic Ooze, and that is the Replicate card, which can enable you to cast another copy of this and just get multiple ooze happening, because if you have 2 Biogenic Ooze on the board, both of them are giving +1/+1 counters to all the ooze, so the value gain is quite exponential and really exciting. And then on top of that, you can even go with the new multicolored Simic enchantment, which I forgot its name. It's called Simic Ascendancy, which gains a growth counter for every +1/+1 counter put onto a creature. So if you have 20 growth counters on this enchantment, you win the game. So I already see, the possibility of combining all these cards and creating like a ooze counter strategy, right? Also, cards like Hadana's Climb, from the Rivals of Ixalan set can chime into this wacky strategy as well. Definitely a card that I'm going to be looking a lot into and seeing several different ways to potentially build around it. But has a lot of fun potential and is definitely very interesting and intriguing. So, worth looking into, and just looks very fun to play overall. And the last green card that I'm going to talk about is a card that I can't say I'm particularly excited for. The proper term would be absolutely batshit terrified, and that is the Wilderness Reclamation, a 4-mana enchantment, which is just absolutely bonkers to me. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. For those of you who have been grinding the ranked best of one Magic the Gathering Arena ladder, you probably have encountered quite a bit of aggro decks, and you've also encountered quite a bit of Nexus of Fate Teferi control decks. Well, meet Nexus of Fate Teferi's new best friend. This enchantment it just seems ridiculous to me. Like, I don't know what the general consensus is. Like, I legitimately don't know what the general consensus of this card is. I have not seen it talked about enough, is what I'm going to say here, because this card is the craziest out of the set for me, in my eyes. This card is just quite insane, and I'm going to try to explain why. This is an enchantment that inherently doubles your mana. It already kind of replaces the value that you played for it as soon as you play it, because at the end of your turn, you're going to be able to untap all the lands that you tapped to play this, right? And what this enables you to do is spend all of your mana resource during your turn on card draw, and then have your mana untapped to enable either counter spells, more card draw, or potentially even Nexus of Fate. One of the reasons why Teferi is so powerful is because of his +1 loyal ability, which not only enables you to draw a card, but also enables you to untap 2 lands, which opens up the possibility to counterspell, or to, in the case of Nexus Teferi decks, play your green spells to prevent combat damage that turn, right? This card just gives Nexus of Fate decks so much freedom. It's really, really scary. Like the fact that this also like stacks, so there's no reason not to run 4 Wilderness Reclamations, because when you have one on the board and you play a second one, they each proc individually. So when the first one procs and all of your lands are untapped during your end step, you can play instants to tap all those lands again, and the second Wilderness will untap them once more. So this card inherently, this is kind of like a 4-mana Omniscience to a certain degree. Like, it's ridiculous the potential this card has for control decks, and specifically for Nexus control decks. And I'm worried about how metagame defining this card has the potential to be. I'm worried this will propel Nexus of Fate decks to the next level, which I don't think is needed, because I think they're already at quite a high level of power. And especially in best of one ranked ladder, where Nexus is even stronger, I'm very scared about this card. And I feel like it's just going to have quite the toxic implications over the metagame. And I just hope I'm wrong, but it's really hard to see this card not being as crazy as I think it's going to be, just because of all the freedom it enables you to do. Like, it enables you to, like, especially this combined with obviously the enchantments, like that give your lands the ability to tap for 2 mana. Like, this just snowballs so much out of control, and it gives Nexus so much power that I just really hope Wizards of the Coast know what they're doing by releasing this card as an uncommon. Like, it just feels like it just casually put in there in the set, and it's going to be massive for the archetype, and hopefully it's just not as powerful as I'm fearing it to be, is what I'm going to say with this. But there's no way this card is not, like, super prevalent, is how I'm going to end this, because I feel like I'm just going to repeat myself. I'm scared of this card, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Let's move on to the next one. We're going to move on from green and spooky Nexus of Fate Enabler onto the multicolored cards. We've got a few to talk about here. We're going to start off with the creatures. And the first one we're going to mention is the Hydroid Craxus, aka Testis Neck. Testis Neck is a Simic creature, which his power is dependent on the amount of mana you pay for him, basically. You have to pay 1 green and 1 blue mana, always, and then he has a set converted value of X, right? And his ability says the following: when you cast a spell, very important, hold on to that right there, you gain half X life and draw half X cards, round down each time. He has a flying and trample keyword, and his power and toughness is dependent on how much you paid for X, because for each value you gave onto X, you gave a +1/+1 counter onto him, because he's originally a 0/0, right? But you added counters onto him, which can be important for certain counter strategies, as there are some decks sorry, some cards in this set that rely on how many counters you put onto a creature, right? So this could already synergize with certain enchantments and such. But the important thing is that this is an effect that procs when you cast the spell. This means that even if Testis Neck here gets countered, it's okay. You're still going to be gaining X life and drawing X cards because its effect procs when you cast the spell, not when it enters the battlefield. So it cannot be prevented, which is very important. Part of me is slightly concerned that this, snack right here is going to be abused in certain decks like, again, Nexus the Fairy. I think this card could fit that deck, as it is a way for you to draw cards and heal yourself and potentially, play a creature to block certain attackers and stuff. Like, it's not a bad card to include onto that deck. Again, it could put in a lot of work, but I generally would like to see this card in both ramp decks, as it gives ramp a really solid tool to regain life, as ramp the strategy does have a bit of a slower start. And it also gives them a potential finisher as well to look forward to, right? And I also like this card potentially maybe in mid-range Sultai builds. I think this card could synergize quite well with Finality. Like, you can play this card early on in the match, not gain too much value out of it, but then as the match progresses, you can use Find to return this from your graveyard to your hand, and you play it again, and it's just a really good resource for value. It is rather slow, and naturally, like, this card, once you pay like 6 mana in total for it and onwards, is when you truly start getting good value out of it. I'd say from 8 to 12 is when it starts to become like really impactful. But while it may be slow, the fact that it heals you and the fact that, it can promote certain ramp strategies, it's just a really cool strategy, a really cool card overall that I feel can fit many different strategies. And it's also, at the same time, one of the hardest cards to predict just how good it will be. Like, we'll just have to wait and see it in action to truly test its overall power level. But it's an exciting card, and I don't know. I'm a big fan of testicle snakes here. So we're going to end it right there with that questionable reference, and we'll move on to the next one. And then we got the Gruul Spellbreaker, a 3-mana creature with 3 power and 3 toughness, and the Riot and Trample keywords. Riot is a new keyword introduced in Ravnica Allegiance, which implicates you either put a +1/+1 counter on said creature, or you give it haste. You have to choose one of the two. So that inherently makes this either a 3-mana 4/4 or a 3-mana 3/3 with Trample. Believe it or not, that is not quite enough to warrant its usage in Standard, because it competes with other really strong 3-drops available in Standard, especially where this sort of 3-drop would want to be in, right? Which is the likes of Mono Green Stompy, even though it would switch over to Gruul Stompy. But I predict that archetype to make that switch, because not mainly because of this card, but I think this card will contribute to it because of its following ability. But like I said, in order to compete with 3-drops, sometimes, being a 4/4 for 3 or being able to have haste and having trample is not quite enough, because you have the J-Light Ranger, you have the Steel Leaf Champion, you have like really strong competition in that slot. But the last portion of his ability really can make the difference in whether this will see usage or not, and that is that as long as it's your turn, you and Gruul Spellbreaker have hexproof. Why is this so prevalent? Because this makes Gruul Spellbreaker an anti-Settle the Wreckage creature, which is a very big deal, because one of the biggest weaknesses of decks like Mono Green Stompy is the likes of Cleansing Nova and Settle the Wreckage, basically board wipes that bypass power and toughness and don't target units directly, because a lot of them, like the Nullhide Ferox, have hexproof, right? Settle the Wreckage is a very, very powerful card that Mono Green has to respect when they face a white-focused control matchup. And Gruul Spellbreaker says no to that. Like, you don't have to worry because you have hexproof, and Settle the Wreckage has to target you. So the fact that this denies Settle the Wreckage, I think, is impactful enough to warrant his slot in the deck, and I do expect Gruul Spellbreaker to see play just because of that, and the fact that on top of that, he's, like I said, giving you a 4/4 for 3 with Trample or a 3/3 with Haste, which is pretty damn good. But Gruul Spellbreaker is not the main reason why I believe Mono Green Stompy will make a switch over to Gruul Stompy. The main reason I actually think this is going to happen is because of a very interesting and potentially powerful enchantment that will be introduced with Ravnica Allegiance, and that is the Gruul enchantment, Rhythm of the Wild. A 3-mana enchantment that says the following: creature spells you control cannot be countered. Non-creature you control have Riot, which means you can give them a +1/+1 counter, or more importantly, haste. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a 3-mana enchantment that makes it that so that your creatures cannot be countered and can have haste. Add this onto the current deck of Mono Green Stompy and just shit yourself, because just let's do some basic math and run over some basic scenarios, okay? You lead off with the Land of our Elf. It's turn 2. You tap the Land of our Elf alongside 2 lands, and you play Rhythm of the Wild. Turn 3, you tap 3 lands and Land of our Elf, and you play a Nullhide Ferox, a 6/6 with hexproof, and now because of this, with haste, that cannot be countered. So if you're facing control, they're just going like, the fuck do we do? They're screwed. Like, they can't counter this thing. It's a 6/6 and it's attacking immediately, and it has hexproof, right? But wait, there's more. Next turn comes in, you have 7 total attack on the board, you play another land, you tap for 5, you play Ghalta Primal Hunger, a 12/12 behemoth with trample, uncounterable, and with haste, aka Carnage Tyrant's daddy. Carnage Tyrant's big boy daddy that is just gonna obliterate you. This card can be so menacing for the Stompy archetype that it's kind of crazy. Like, I did not see enough people talking about this card when it's like one of the ones that made the biggest impression on me. This card is both funny and scary at the same time, and I definitely will be incorporating it to my Gruul Stompy deck, which I will be brewing, once the expansion is released. I just think the fact that this makes Primal Hunger a potential 12/12 with haste that can't be countered is just kind of insane to me, right? Like, I'm going to make I'm going to shout out the new Planeswalker Domri as well, because Domri can also enable a Primal Hunger with haste because of his +1 loyal ability, because he gives the creatures that, you spend that mana to cast on Riot, right? Which can enable you to give the Primal Hunger haste. But what Domri doesn't do, that this enchantment does, is that it also makes them uncounterable. So this can also be a very powerful sideboard tech. You can have more copies of this enchantment in your sideboard for when you're facing control. But you don't even need to rely on, like, it's just like an extra thing. Like, this enchantment seems nutty to me, and I definitely cannot wait to try this bad boy out, because I think this is gonna propel that archetype to the next level, and it's something to watch out for sure. Like, it's also like this alongside other enchantments that we're getting in this expansion leads me to believe that enchantment removal may become more of a necessity once Ravnica Allegiance hits. So moving on from the craziness that's going to be Gruul Stompy to some Esper tools. While the Planeswalker is a little bit underwhelming in the eyes of many, and mine included, we do have a really cool 4-drop here that I think can be built around in several different ways, and that is the legendary creature Taizo Karloff. Hopefully I pronounced that right. The 4 mana, like I said, legendary creature with 2 power and 4 toughness, and an ability that says the following: if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. So the most obvious synergy that this creature provides you with is with the afterlife creatures being, provided to you in this expansion, right? But she goes way beyond that. She synergizes with already established creatures in the standard metagame, such as the Midnight Reaper, which will proc twice now when a creature dies, drawing you 2 cards instead. You got to be careful not to die to it because of that, right? But there's many different resources out there available that this unit synergizes with, and it's actually really exciting from a deck building standpoint. I feel like Taizo enables you to take her in several different directions. You can go Esper, you can go Abzan Saprolings even, because she does promote, Slimefoot among other things to proc more, and she does give your sapling tokens vigilance and lifelink. She could mix with Selenia tokens in a certain way and give you an Absent tokens deck. And like I said, she fits in several different, many different archetypes and strategies, and she could even promote new ones as well. I find her to be really intriguing. It's hard to say exactly how I will build around her because, like I said, she offers many different possibilities, but it is very exciting and definitely one of the creatures that I will be looking forward to building around the most, and one that I will brainstorm with a lot. So really excited for Taizo Karloff, and I think she can be quite powerful, and like I said, provide you with many different options. So really cool card. One of the coolest cards, I think, that was introduced with this new set. And then if you're a fan of hilarious win conditions, then Captive Audience may be the card for you. It is a 7 mana enchantment that says the following: Captive Audience enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. And at the beginning of your upkeep, this is what your opponent would be reading as he controls this card, choose one that has not been chosen yet. And you have 3 options, kind of like a pick your poison type of scenario here. Your life total becomes 4, discard your hand, or each opponent creates 5 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. This card is hilarious. This could be a pretty funny win condition for a sort of Grixis control deck, for example. It can actually work pretty well in conjunction with Nicol Bolas, just because Nicol Bolas is 4/4, has 4 attack, is flying, so he can finish off the opponent after they, reduce their life total to 4. And while it seems crazy slow, especially if you're facing against aggro decks, I will definitely be trying to make this card work one way or another. And it's cool that we got, cards like this to have fun and mess around with the set and stuff, because like I said, I definitely will be trying this one out, and we'll probably lose a lot versus Mono Red and Boros Weenies, but if I manage to slow them down, it has to be one of the most satisfying ways to win, right? slowly watching your opponent just have to, I'm pretty sure they will all start off with discarding their hand. I think, especially if you're facing more aggressive decks, their hand will be quite depleted at that stage. So like I said, it can be quite slow, but it's really damn funny. So I definitely will be trying this one out, and I thought it deserved an honorable mention at the very least. And next we're going to talk about Mortify, an Esper source of removal. For 3 mana, it's an instant that enables you to destroy target creature or enchantment. I actually expect rather big things from Mortify. I think it will take a stand and will find home in the standard metagame, especially if cards like Rhythm of the Wild become as prevalent as I expect they may be. The fact that this card can destroy any creature or enchantment makes it rather flexible, and it's hard to imagine a matchup in which this card does not find good use, right? Obviously, it's 3 mana, which makes it 1 mana more than, for example, Cast Down. So against aggro matchups, it's not really the greatest, but even maybe against Mono Red, right? But even in that matchup, it can still destroy Experimental Frenzy instead of a creature. That flexibility, I think, is very valuable, especially because in the Boros Weenie matchup, it can destroy a Conclave Tribunal, or it can destroy a Knights of Benalia. Hell, it can even destroy a Legion's Landing if you want to do that, even though that's probably not something you want to do, but it's there as an option. And of course, this card becomes a viable source of removal that's also good against control decks. You can take down their Search for Ascanthas. You can take down their Excellence Bindings, etc. Like, this is very flexible. It's faster than Vraska's Contempt, but of course it does not enable you to hit Planeswalkers. And I think it's really good. I honestly think it's very balanced as well. Like, it seems like a fair card, but that flexibility, especially considering the metagame that we may be facing once this set hits, I definitely expect Mortify to find its place, at the very least, in Esper control decks. If I'm playing Esper control, I will definitely be running Mortify for the time being, because I think it definitely... I also think it's even more efficient in a best of one ranked environment because of its flexibility, right? In best of three, time will tell, but I do think this card will be good, and we'll see quite a bit of play personally. And then we got the dual card, Thrash Threat. I think this card is going to be decent. It's hard to say just how effective it will be, but I feel like Thrash, it just feels really solid, enabling you to hit something, including Planeswalkers, for damage equal to the amount of power a creature you control. It can be really useful. Like, a 2-mana Planeswalker removal tool can be quite prevalent, and it can be an effective way for you to deal with, like, a Vivian Raid, for example, if you're facing Golgari midrange and they have a good amount of blockers. I'm not sure, like I said, just how prevalent this card would be, but I felt like it warranted at least a mention on this list, as I think it can definitely put in the work. Threat is obviously like a very fair card, and, you know, in standard, fair cards don't really go a long way. Like, it's a 4-mana 4/4 with trample for 4. Like, yeah, cool story. Like, I'd rather have something, you know, like a 6/6 with hexproof, playing Nullhide Ferox. But it's still, I think this card is still flexible and good enough, and it will see some play. But it's hard to really predict just how useful it will truly be in standard, to be honest. Maybe more so in limited, or maybe I'm completely wrong and this card is just straight up amazing. But I don't currently see it. Though, like I said, the fact that it can hit Planeswalkers for 2 mana, that warrants it for me, at least, to mention it. And the last card we're going to talk about today is a Planeswalker. Well, I've had made honorable mentions to Domri and not so honorable mention to Kaya as Planeswalkers prior in this video, even though they don't have their own slot in the 18 cards that I selected. You know, Domri does, I think, fulfill quite an interesting niche, and I will definitely be playing him in my Gruul Stompy deck, because the idea of giving, like I said, Primal Hunger haste is really sexy. We're going to talk about the one Planeswalker that I do find quite intriguing and that warrants a slot on this list, and that is Dovan, the Grand Arbiter. Now, Planeswalkers in Magic the Gathering are quite interesting because the vast majority of Planeswalkers that we see in actual standard metagame play are sort of answer or die cards. You either answer them or you die. You lose the game. Like, that's what happens with the Fairy, and that's what tends to happen with the likes of Vivian Raid as well, right? Dovan doesn't quite fall into this category, but Dovan does provide certain tempo decks with a very interesting option for fuel. And what I mean by this is that Dovan is a 3-mana Planeswalker with initially 3 loyal points right there, and a +1, a -1, and a -7. So the +1 says that until the end of the turn, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to the opponent, you gain 1 more loyal point onto Dovan, right? His -1 is that you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, and you gain 1 life. So as a Planeswalker, he has the ability to block or protect himself by going -1. And then he has a -7, which is the reason why you want to run him. You want to build up, you want to go for the +1 loyal ability while you have a, you know, early game board presence to enable this ultimate to happen, which says the following: look at the top 10 cards of your library, put 3 of them into your hand, and the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So you get to look at the top 10 cards, select the 3 best, and put them in your hand. Drawing you 3 cards, but not only drawing you 3 cards, drawing you 3 cards out of 10 is a crazy effect, though obviously it takes a while to apply. I do think Dovan is quite balanced as a Planeswalker. This is not a Planeswalker that can hit the board and I can just shit myself. He's like, oh my god, if I don't kill this in like one turn, it's over. Like the fairy is, right? This guy can... It depends on your board state. Like, I think Dovan will find home, but in specific decks. It's not like the fairy where if you're playing a control deck, you just play the fairy. It's as simple as that. You don't need specific synergy. You just have counter spells, board wipes, have a control sort of strategy, a slower game plan. Just play the fairy. Just do it. You'll benefit from it for sure. Dovan doesn't, like I said, fall into that category, and that's what makes him quite interesting to me. Though some people may argue the fact that if a Planeswalker isn't broken to that degree, that it's not really playable. I beg to differ. I think with the right deck building around Dovan, he can be more than viable. He can actually be really solid. The thing is, the kind of deck that promotes Dovan is a deck similar to the mono blue tempo or the white weenie list. More so mono blue tempo, I think, because of the fact that you have flyers and unblockable units, right, which can enable you to ensure that you get that damage going, or those creatures to connect, so you can up the loyal points onto him. Because what Dovan can provide to a deck like that is fuel. A lot of times those decks, especially like Mono Blue Tempo, if they don't draw into Curious Obsession, they can run out of steam really quickly because they have a very low curve. Dovan can enable you to refuel and search for the key cards, may them be counter spells, Curious Obsession, etc. The fact that Dovan can enable you to do that definitely warrants a slot in that type of deck, though it wouldn't be a Mono Blue Tempo deck anymore, because one of the implications of running the Dovan in that deck is that you have to run some sort of white source of mana for him, which means that your Djinns that rely on you having only islands for them to be powerful become a bit hindered. So it would have to be some sort of Azorius tempo deck, which you will have to see people try to build, right? But I think Dovan can definitely find its place in Standard and put in the work. He's not like a super OP Planeswalker by any means, and requires you to actually build around him, which is what I like seeing from Planeswalkers, instead of, just Planeswalkers that you fit anywhere, and as long as you have the same color, and they'll do good. And it's a good an interesting design direction that Wizards is taking, and I'm excited to see what Dovan can provide. But we'll see. Just because right now, like, the idea of building like a Azorius tempo deck is not as easy, right? Because you have to mix certain aspects from both colors, and it can be a little bit clunky. But it's exciting. It's a cool Planeswalker to build around, and I think we could see some big things in the future from Dovan. And I'll be trying it out myself for sure. And with that, I'm going to conclude the video right here. That is, not sure how long this was as a total, but hopefully, through editing, I can have made this a little bit shorter. But I had quite a bit to talk about. And yeah, these are the 18 cards that I found either the most powerful or intriguing, and that caught my attention the most. Let me know if I missed any sort of card that you guys would want me to talk about. We could just discuss it in the comment section down below, or wherever you want to. Thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for some more MTG content, as I do upload videos every day. And I hope you guys are excited as I am for the the Ravnica Allegiance derp expansion, because I am going to get to work. I'm going to start building as many decks as I can, and hopefully I can get that Pestilence Spirit deck going on. That's the one I'm most hyped for. That and maybe some Gruul Stompy action. But yeah, I'm gonna be building quite a bit, and I'm hyped for it. So hope you are as well. Have a solid day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video.